Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Maayan Ziv. Maayan is a passionate and relentless advocate for creating a more accessible world. She's developed an app called Access Now. Today we talk all about it and how we can all work towards a more accessible future. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, Maayan. It's great to see you.
Hi, nice to see you.
So I'm really excited to talk to you. There's so many things I want to discuss with you. Obviously, I want to talk about the app that you developed. It's Access Now. I want to talk about that. I want to get into all of that and why it's important to have an app like yours. But before we do that, we should really talk a little bit about you. In case people haven't heard of you, they're not familiar with your work as a photographer. Do you describe yourself as an activist and a photographer, or how do you describe yourself?
So I didn't really think of myself as an activist originally. I started kind of my career as a photographer. And through my work, I found that one of the things that I loved the most about, showing up on sets and working with people was that I was constantly challenging norms. So people didn't expect, a 20-something-year-old girl in a wheelchair to show up and be the photographer. They didn't expect me to be working in fashion or portraiture, and challenging people's assumptions about, who is a photographer, who has agency, who can be creative, and that someone with a disability like myself could absolutely be in that role. I realized that there was a lot of advocacy kind of really embedded within what I loved about my job. And so that started to take on kind of a life of its own. And I started looking for other ways to be, more vocal about my perspective and some of the kind of disconnects that I was seeing.
So I would think that for anybody who wants to get into photography at a fashion level or, whatever it might be, it would be difficult, very competitive. And, there's a lot of photographers out there. I would guess that being a wheelchair user, it's even harder. Or is it not? I don't know.
I mean, like, yes and no. The photography industry has changed so much, even from when I started. So when I started, it was pre-Instagram, and watching kind of social media take off around the work that I was doing very much changed the landscape in terms of like how you get noticed. What does it take to kind of break through the clutter and the noise? And how do you create a brand that people kind of identify and want to work with you? Because there are so many amazing people out there who are very creative. So how do you create a career out of that? And, in many ways, yes, I had to kind of fight way harder to be heard or to be taken seriously. But also, I had this really interesting advantage in that I did stand out and I was memorable and I wasn't like, the majority of people that were working in the industry. And so that really actually helped me create personal relationships with people. And it helped me identify, people who were kind of what I would call on my team, people who were interested in doing something different or, more open to exploring, what it is that I had to offer as opposed to just shutting it down right away. So it's kind of a mix between, yes, definitely more challenges in terms of inaccessible spaces and, fighting against stigma and stereotype. But at the same time, I'd like to say that my disability also gives me this kind of unique competitive advantage. And I embrace that fully.
So when you were growing up, I'm trying to understand how I'm trying to lead up to your app is what I'm trying to do. So
Sure.
When we think about accessibility, when we think about, you as a young person, as a wheelchair user in school or, just in life, in everyday life, did you face a lot of barriers as a child?
I mean, I've always faced barriers. I pretty quickly as a young girl realized that my experience was quite dramatically different than my friends who didn't have disabilities. And I was kind of always needing to think ahead. I was like 10 steps ahead in my mind about, if we were going to go somewhere or do something, if there was a field trip or, even recess or I just very quickly realized that I'm going to have to kind of MacGyver my own way. There are endless barriers in the built environment, as an example, places that are not accessible to me. And that became very evident, from as long as I can remember, that I couldn't go places with my wheelchair, that there were steps or, just even beyond kind of the built environment, there just wasn't really a lot of awareness about the importance of including people who were different. When I was growing up, that was really, really a different landscape than it is now. And it is changing quite dramatically now for all different types of communities. So I think it's a really interesting time to be working specifically in accessibility because it gives me an opportunity not only to learn from other people's perspectives, but to really vocalize an issue that's been around forever. And yet, finally, it feels like maybe we're breaking through and reaching people that really haven't even thought about some of the issues that literally millions of people face every day.
It's 20. I think it's 25% of Canadians identify as having a disability. That's a lot of people. It's not a minority group. It's a large group of people. So when you think of accessibility, what does it mean to you? Like what? Because I think that access or accessibility, when we say those words to people, I'm not sure they really understand. If they have access to everything, they don't really understand what that means. What does it mean to you?
To me, I think accessibility is really about like a function and a mindset that is committed to enabling and empowering all people to be included. It's not like this mechanical thing that you go buy from a store. It's really about understanding that when we design for, a broad range of needs, we land on something much more inclusive that includes people and allows people to, use a product, engage in a service, show up at a company, have a job where they feel fulfilled. It shows up in so many different ways, from customer service to experiences and all different things, that accessibility isn't like a grab bar in a washroom. And I think a lot of people still think of it as like this clunky kind of mechanical thing that's for people with specific needs. And when you break out of that mold and you realize that it's really a tool to empower people, there's a lot more creativity and innovation there.
Yeah, I really like that description. And I think that when we think about people, because of there's visible disabilities and invisible disabilities. And I tend to think that we're a bit, we assume things so much, right? As human beings, we assume everything. So we see someone with a visible disability, and then we've already, in our minds, like it or not, it's, we are ableist, right? It's been happening for so long that we then assume we know who this person is because they use a wheelchair or they're using a walker or they have, my son has Down syndrome, a visible disability. So they, assumptions are made about what he can and cannot do. When I'm going to assume being a wheelchair user, you've had a lot of people assume they know who you are before you even say anything.
Yeah, for sure. There's always this kind of invisible assumption cloud that follows me around. but also, like I find that on a good day, the best kind of challenge. Because I'm an advocate, I love being able to bring people into a world they never even imagined exists. And often, when I, talk about my work or I meet people for the first time, yeah, it's really hard to often get those opportunities initially, because, just people do make assumptions about what I can or cannot do, or what people in general with disabilities are capable of. But I think just inherently my nature is that I love a challenge. I take it as an opportunity to do something new and creative. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's the name of the game.
Exactly. Exactly. So when did you, the app is called Access Now. And when did this idea, like obviously everything starts with an idea. When did the idea first come to you?
So I was studying my master's at the time. I was studying digital media. And I even found myself in that program because I'd been working as a photographer for a little while, really started to realize that this kind of stream of advocacy was really just running through me. And I wanted to see what else I could do, just wanted to learn. And so I was in school, and within the first week, the whole week had been about looking around the world, thinking about challenges, problems that people have, people we know, or different communities, just as kind of like a brainstorm week. And at the end of the week, we went to a restaurant off campus, and the whole class was like excited, here we go, it's the beginning of the year. And I was on campus trying to find my way, and I didn't know if the restaurant was going to be accessible. And we show up, and there's like 5 steps to the entrance, and there's like this narrow kind of alley with like a iron gate that had kind of been lodged halfway open that we kind of pried it wide enough to get me through. And then we pulled like 5 different garbage bins out of the alley, and eventually I was in the backyard where there was a patio with like part of it that I could access. And I was like, first of all, what a horrible experience for someone to show up and want to be included and literally having to be taken through the garbage to be included with their friends. But secondly, here's my problem. Here is one of the problems that follows me every single place that I go. And it seemed so simple that I should be able to find information in advance about whether or not this restaurant was accessible. And it's the question I ask every time I go anywhere. And so it's very rare, but I did kind of have this like aha light bulb moment where I thought, this is totally the problem I want to focus on. And then I spent the next 9 months or so just researching and learning and discovering, beyond my own needs as a person with a disability, what does the law state about accessibility, and what do business owners have to do, and what can we create digitally that can kind of look to solve this problem. That was what started Access Now.
Wow. So it's stressful to, for if everybody thinks about going to a place and not knowing what to expect, not knowing if they can access the place, just to imagine that, right? That is stressful. It's because I think that the majority of people, Maayan, I think that they think that there are laws in this country that every single business, every single place has to be accessible, full stop. It's against the law, or why wouldn't it be, or all of those things. Is it the law in this country?
So there are different laws depending on where you are. In Canada, there is new legislation. It's about a few years old now, for the first time ever, that kind of looks at countrywide rights for people with disabilities. In Ontario specifically, we've got legislation that's, close to or over 20 years old now that specifically looks at, the built environment as one component. And yeah, there are laws and there are deadlines associated with those, and we're not at all on track to meet them. We're not going to have a barrier-free Ontario by 2025. That's just not going to happen. And so, if you go to the States in the 90s, they created the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that was kind of one of the biggest pieces in kind of disability law history that really started this focus on access. But again, the world is riddled with barriers, even though we have legislation. And another kind of motivating factor for me was like, why? Why is it that if we have these laws, they're not enforced? Why aren't we seeing change? I don't want to wait 40 years for something to maybe be accessible. What if we just started flagging all of the barriers that we experience in the world? Could we use that data to create progress? And it's become one of the most important kind of objectives for Access Now along the way.
Yeah, because people like data. They like to know what's the research on this, and you're gathering that research, really.
Yeah, and also because like we measure what we value, and if we're not measuring, the lay of the land, if we're not really keeping track of the barriers and the instances in which people have access where they are denied access, how are we supposed to make progress on that?
Mm. Mm. So what do you say to, businesses that, they're not big corporations, they're not federally run, they're not, any of those things. And they're like, I can't do this. I don't have the money to, put a ramp in my restaurant or my store, or I can't, change that. It's too much money.
Well, for one thing, I would say is that the whole concept of building for majority and then considering the needs of, for example, people with disabilities as an afterthought will always mean that you're playing catch up, and it will always be more expensive to kind of course correct and retrofit barriers that you actually paid to create. So if you're creating anything new, whether you're a business owner creating a website or, a bricks and mortar location, or a new product, incorporating the perspective and lived experience of people with disabilities from the design and planning stage is already going to dramatically help you reduce how many issues you have to deal with later. So that's one first important lesson. And then, if you're already a business owner, you've already got a location or a product or a website, and you're like, well, how do I even tackle this? I want to make my business more accessible to people, but I'm afraid, or it's expensive, or it's not a priority. There's so many different reasons that I've heard about why it's not possible. I always like to challenge business owners to think about the competitive advantage and the opportunity granted when you invest in access. So as opposed to looking at it as some sort of tax, some sort of have to do, considering, $13 trillion in annual disposable income that the disability market has to offer, if you're a business owner and you're trying to attract customers, investing in a space or a product or a service that's accessible is going to grant you an audience that right now you might not be accessing. And, if you're a smart business owner, that's just good business sense.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. Do you think that, one of our challenges that we don't seem to be very good at is inviting disabled people to the decision and policy-making tables when we're discussing, things that do affect people who are disabled? I think it's changing now, but I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, within the disability community, there's kind of this really treasured and kind of important philosophy called nothing about us without us, which is basically, something that I full-heartedly follow in everything that I do, is that if you're going to create a policy or a practice, a business, or if you're literally going to do anything that involves people with disabilities, I would actually say if you're going to do anything, you should involve people with disabilities anyway. But specifically, if you're going to do anything that involves people with disabilities, it's really important to include people with disabilities as part of that process. Because imagine for, and it seems like it makes sense, but then, even just now we're starting to realize that products designed for women should probably be designed by women. And that in itself is kind of like a radical thing that only now we understand. Policies for women should be designed with women. And so take that to any group, any community, and you're just never going to be able to do it justice if you're not including the group that this is for. And so I think the major disconnect, specifically when it comes to disability, is that there's this major gap, this assumption, this void where people think, oh, I try to hire people with disabilities, but I can't find them, or I just don't think that this is too demanding, and there's all these just myths that are out there in the world that have nothing to do with the reality of what people with disabilities are capable of.
Very good points. So we're going to talk about your app in detail in a second here. But before we do that, we always like to thank our guests for taking the time to be here. And we do that by asking them to choose a registered Canadian nonprofit that we give $500 to on your behalf for being here with us. And you chose Stop Gap Foundation, and they help communities discover the benefit of barrier-free spaces and provide support to create them. So thank you for choosing Stop Gap, and we will be giving them $500.
Amazing.
So Access Now. Let's say I download the app. I have it on my phone now. What does the app help me do? And where is it just for Canada, or where does it, tell me about the app. I log on, here I am.
Sure. Okay. So basically, from that original inspiration of I want to go out and know what I can do and know what's accessible to me, really what we developed is a platform that gives people answers. It's an app that, if you think of any kind of navigation or map-based platform, you could search for a restaurant, you could search for a hotel, you could search for a store or a park, or literally anything that you might want to find information about. And we put accessibility at the forefront of kind of the decision-making process for people. So if you have any type of accessibility need, you can discover, whether or not that space has, let's say, an automatic door at the entrance or an accessible washroom, or, if you're going to be kind of treated well when you bring your guide dog with you, if there's going to be digital menus or Braille. We've really continued to expand the list of what we share information about on the app. It started in Toronto, but we're reaching over 35 countries now. And really the way we've grown is just through the nature of collaboration. So people with and without disabilities log on. They write their own reviews about businesses or places they've been. They share what they love and what they found really, not a good experience. And that helps, educate the rest of the community about, what's out there for people. We collaborate with businesses that are sharing, information about their own business properties. And increasingly so, we're also engaging with governments to look at kind of citywide level accessibility.
That's fantastic. So how many users do you have, or do you know, or and what's your goal? So how many years have you, I have so many questions right now about this, I just asked you 4 questions right now. Because I didn't realize you were in 35 countries right now. That's amazing.
It's, I think for me, the most rewarding part of what started with just, one girl in a wheelchair trying to go to a restaurant is that we've been able to kind of unlock something a lot more powerful in kind of a shared community that is, it's not every one person out on their own stuck in the street. It's a global community of people who all experience similar barriers, maybe different, in their own personal lives of how it shows up, but we all have a desire to create a more connected and accessible world. And some people might show up and, add one thing one time. Some people are, die-hard reviewers who map everything they ever do or see. And some people just use it to find information. And I'd say, thousands of people all around the world from literally like the first week we launched. It started from there and it's just continued to grow. And it's the most rewarding thing for me in everything that we do at Access Now is the people that we get to meet and learn from and increasingly are educated about, how accessibility translates to a sense of belonging for people in their own communities.
Mm. Yeah. And it's important. I think I'd probably be one of those people that just like uses it for information because, there's a lot of people out there that are planners and they like to plan and know, right? And not be surprised or embarrassed or uncomfortable or whatever it might be. So are you still photographing? Are you still doing that? Or does this app take up all your time now?
So professionally, I'm not working as a photographer anymore. It's kind of like my first love that I will always carry with me, and I will always, take photos wherever I go. It's definitely something that I just enjoy doing. But really, as Access Now grew, it just became so obvious that this needed my full heart and soul, and it's an opportunity I just had to chase. So I have no regrets about doing that. And increasingly so, I try to find interesting ways to incorporate kind of image making into my work at Access Now as well.
And so if you were to look ahead, say the next, I don't know. Are you a short-term goal person or a long-term goal person? But if you look ahead, say in the next 3 to 5 years, where do you see or where do you hope to see Access Now?
So our goal is to be able to kind of provide people with information about the accessibility of places and experiences all around the world so that you could literally be any person anywhere in the world and find answers to questions about how accessible a space is going to be. It's a huge mission. And so it really is about engaging as many people, educating, full communities about the importance of access if they don't yet understand it, and creating this kind of global movement. So we're dedicated to doing that each and every day. And, I hope that within the next few years, we go from 35 countries to 100 and more. And increasingly, we start to also hopefully see businesses that were originally rated as inaccessible start to remove some of those barriers with the information we've been able to share.
I have no doubt that you will be in all the countries you want to be in. It's fantastic. And Maayan, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot. The app is called Access Now, and you can download it right now. You can also visit Maayan's website, which is Maayan Ziv, that's Maayan Ziv, ZIV.com, or on Twitter at Maayan Ziv, or on Instagram at MaayanZiv_. Maayan, thank you so much for a great conversation.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.